Okay, Jeff Light here with our daily look behind the news from the UT Newsroom, talking this morning with immigration writer Kate Morrissey. Morning, Kate.
Morning.
A lot of news on your beat as usual.
Yes.
And I think last night you gave a bit of an update on Jeff Sessions' announcement yesterday, changing sort of the thresholds for prosecution of illegal border crossers. So I guess first just catch us up on that. What is the new threshold?
So they're basically saying it's a zero tolerance policy. Everybody caught by Border Patrol will be referred to the U.S. Attorney's Office for prosecution, and the U.S. Attorney's Office will prosecute every person that they have the ability to do that with.
Mm-hmm. And so this is a departure from the historic standard. I guess, what was the Obama administration stance? And if you know, you and I haven't talked about this, even going back historically, how has this been handled?
Yeah, so when you talk to people who were around historically, the policy was to focus on people who were repeat crossers, or people who, say, had some kind of criminal history, or maybe they were crossing illegally and they were carrying drugs, or there was more involved than just walking across once for the first time in your life.
And what would happen to that person, the person who's apprehended and, as far as we know, no record and no other crime?
So they would be put through what's called expedited removal, where the person, the agency that apprehends them is able to determine whether or not they have any claim of being able to be here, and if not, they're sent back to their country of origin. So notably, if they were from Mexico, that we could just probably very quickly take them back to Mexico. If they are from another country, then there's a little bit more work involved to actually take them back to their country of origin. And then some people who were claiming asylum also come through that route, either because they don't know where the ports are, or they're terrified and can't find them, or they think to themselves, I see an agent right there, I'll just go ask him for help.
Right. Although proportionally, the number of asylum seekers is a very small portion of the flow, right?
It's hard to say because they don't track that. And it's unclear to me whether that's something they can track, because there's a lot of privacy regulations around the asylum process and who's asking and how many. So even when we look at data at the port, we have a hard time finding out exactly how many people asked for asylum versus how many people came to the port wanting to come in who didn't have documents. That's usually the number we're able to get.
Although I think we do have data on the success rate of asylum seekers downstream.
Yes.
And I think if we looked at all of those versus even just the southern border, we'll see that's a very small group, although an important one, I'm sure. So let's get a sense of the numbers. Like on a monthly or daily basis, you and I were just talking about this. What are the numbers of illegal crossers, and what proportion, how are they currently being sorted?
Sure. So that has fluctuated a lot in the last 12 to 16 months. We saw it go way down in the spring of 2017. April was the lowest month, with like 11,000 plus arrests along the southern border. And then in recent months, it's been in the upper 30s, 37,000, 38,000.
Yeah, and not an atypical number for recent years.
No, it's actually still quite a bit lower than if you look back and say the year 2000, we had a much higher number of apprehensions.
Okay, and of those 35,000, my sense is the great majority are treated or fall into the category you just talked about. Appear to be a first-time crosser or no previous record, no other crime besides unlawful entry, and they're being turned back, right? Do we have a sense of the proportions in the current setup?
Yeah, so as I reported in the story yesterday, in March there were about 7,000 immigration-related prosecutions from the Department of Justice. So if you think about 38,000 versus 7,000, it's definitely not everybody.
Yeah. Okay. So like now we're sort of getting to the nub of it. So now we've got 30,000 people in March who would have had to be accommodated in some way, detained, imprisoned, arraigned, represented. Do we have any sense of like what the what arrangements have been made for that? They did put on more judges, right?
They brought more immigration judges who actually have
Oh, that's
nothing
different, yeah.
nothing to do with the criminal prosecution process. That's to hear ostensibly from the administration to hear asylum claims more quickly. So they are sort of relating this idea of asking for asylum in these criminal prosecutions, which is interesting. But they did bring more prosecutors here, but we don't have more judges. I did ask the department about that yesterday, and they said because of the way that judges get appointed, it's not something
Yeah.
we can just like
Yeah,
send
they're
them
federal
here.
judges.
Right.
This whole process.
So that would have to be a whole thing to bring more judges here. But there are more prosecutors. So far, talking with people who are former federal defenders, there's not a push to similarly ramp up the number of people who are able to defend these folks. So that's something to keep an eye on as well.
So let's use this March as just sort of a rule of thumb, 30,000 people. And over the course of a year, let's say there's a diminishing impact, right? So, but certainly several 100,000 people who would need to be detained. You and I were talking about the sort of federal prison population right now, which, what was the number of the
It
total?
was about a little over 180,000 federal inmates in the Bureau of Prisons.
So this is going to be quite a logistical challenge to house hundreds of thousands of
Yes.
pretty,
House and transport. So when as I reported yesterday in my story, there's an attorney who represents both criminal clients and immigration clients, and he was saying that he's been told his clients will be housed in Santa Ana or San Bernardino, but then they still have to come all the way to the court here in San Diego for their cases, and so the U.S. Marshals has to transport them back and forth over all that distance. So that's also something to consider, is the logistics of moving these people to their court hearings if
and I
they're
think,
being held
you know,
elsewhere.
in particular here, prison and jail space is at a premium. The prisons, state prisons are overpopulated, and as a result, the local jails where the federal agencies rent space are also beyond capacity. So I think this is going to be a very interesting puzzle to figure out, let alone the cost
Right.
on a per day basis, a per diem basis, which I think we can also figure out. Okay, I'm looking forward to seeing what the roadmap is from the government point of view, and what your reporting shows. So looking forward to it. If you have questions for Kate, jump on here or reach out to her directly, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.